Fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Got Mr. Michael Olympics Hawley.
That's correct. Not too close to Olympics, though.
No, I've avoided them for some reason, not on purpose. I've been so busy. So all the Prime stuff we're doing, I haven't had time to see anything. So you're into the Olympics, or you're not even watching it?
I got busy. I'm working on footnotes on a big research article, so it's like my brain is all stuck in that right now. So then my wife goes, "What are you doing?" I go, "What's your name?" So that I get focused.
Don't say that. That's nothing but trouble. That is.
I know. She'll kick my butt.
You're asking for war there. Speaking of hot topics in war, we've got a writer with us. He's done quite a few books. We had him on before talking about his series, but we're going to talk about them. He's got a few more since then, and more coming out. So let's talk to the author. And of course, his book, the series are the Rake Ozenna series, and of course, it's Humphrey Hawksley. So thank you for being here.
Alan, Michael, very, very. It's a privilege to be back on the show again after so many years. Thank you for having me.
Nice speaking with you.
Yeah, it's always a thrill. So, it seems like years go by and things just stay the same. The names change. And we still kind of have the same things going on, I guess, relatively. It moves around and stuff like that. And it's interesting you cover them in your thriller series, like a lot of things that kind of come to pass. So you're really the future, all in one.
I don't know. I mean, I think at my stage, I won't go into age and cycles here, but I think everything's not staying the same. It's as if it's coming round full circle. Because when I was a young journalist, the Berlin Wall came down, and it was the end of history, and democracy was going to take over the whole world, and we were all going to live happily ever after. But then we see the same things happening that were happening in the 1930s or before the First World War at the beginning of the 20th century. And we see people at the top, the leaders, and we think, how come these guys are making these decisions? And you think, oh, so nobody really ever learns. Or maybe that's part of our human condition. Or maybe we just like war and hostility. I don't know, maybe you guys have got a better answer. But that's where and the Rake Ozenna series that you mentioned is based up in the Arctic, which I began after Russia's first threats to Ukraine, because that's where the US-Russian border is. And I thought I'd better go up and have a look at this border, because you've got the two antagonistic nuclear powers facing each other off. And of course, it's a wilderness there, but there's two islands there. And I remember Sarah Palin saying years ago, that election, saying that Americans can see Russia from their front yards, or backyards, she might have said, and she was laughed out of court. But I went to the American island, which has got 80 villages on it, and they get up every morning and they see a Russian military base less than 3 miles across the water. So I went to that Russian island, to that American island, just to see what it was like and what that border was like.
And that's never really been a spot of action, has it? That border between America and Russia.
It hasn't. And I think I was up in Alaska recently, actually, in December, and talking to people there. And I think it hasn't for one, it's a very practical reason, is that not many people live there, and to actually fight a war there would be detrimental to both sides, because your supply chains and the temperature and there's no cities to hold or anything like that. So it's not like Ukraine or Checkpoint Charlie in the Cold War that ran through the middle of Berlin. And it was quite interesting, because during the Cold War, that border was completely open before the Cold War, and then a border became a closed border there, and has been pretty much ever since, apart from the early 90s when things loosened up a bit. But during the Cold War, the Russians shot down a number of American planes that were spying or carrying out things over Russian territory. But the Americans didn't respond. And when I asked one of the guys up there, why didn't the Americans respond, it's because we didn't want to escalate it so quickly. So they took the hit.
Well, what's interesting is I used to be a Navy pilot,
Right.
and in 1989, I was stationed out of Hawaii, but we went we had massive exercises off the coast of Adak, Alaska, with the assumption that the Soviet Union, that's how they were going to invade the United States, is go there, and so we did the exercise there. Now my warfare specialty was anti-submarine warfare, so we knew that was going to be the battle off the coast of that. So I was kind of curious if you dealt with that, any of that stuff in your book.
Oh, well, I've done four books, and a fifth one's coming out. And I went to, well, you would understand this, NORAD, which is the sort of protective umbrella there, and the Elmendorf-Richardson base where Trump met Putin last year, which you would be familiar with. I found it interesting in that the people that I talked to then when I was there called it, at that stage, a non-hostile border. In fact, they didn't expect anything to flare up there because the attention was over in Europe on Ukraine. And apparently there was this unwritten agreement during the Cold War that they would keep the border quiet. But now, of course, that's all changed, hasn't it, Michael? Because the Arctic is becoming a focus. Greenland has become this focus with the Trump administration, and the ice is melting. So those trade routes and the seas are becoming accessible, and no one quite knows, what Putin's intentions are in that part of the world. I did hear something very interesting during the Putin summit at Elmendorf-Richardson base that ended up with nothing. Apparently, a deal was floated there that if they came to some agreement in Ukraine, whatever it was, the US would help Russia open up the Far East, East Asia for its economy. But that didn't quite wash. I don't know whether it's still around. But interesting. What do you think, Michael, the reaction would be if Russia took a patch of undefended American territory, just to make a point?
What's interesting, and I think you are absolutely right. Now, back then it was perestroika times, and so everything was kind of warmed up anyway. Cooled down, and then so that exercise was just kind of like, well, we no longer need it anymore. So then the Navy doesn't do that exercise anymore because of that. I mean, it's because it's kind of a different world. So I think it would be a shocker. That would be a stunner. But again, one of the things that we do at like the Naval War College is try to figure out every kind of scenario that could happen. So I'm sure that that's still part of the discussion there. But I bet you're right, though. I bet that's kind of been ignored.
Is that the Naval War College on Rhode Island?
Yes.
Yeah, I did a lot of research up there, some of it that went into the Rake Ozenna series and some that went into a non-fiction book I did called Asian Waters. They were absolutely great. They gave me 2 days and rolled out expert after expert.
That is so cool.
Yeah, it has. It's and very interestingly, they had. We're going a little off piece now, but I'll just say this one. We got pictures of the Japanese general, an admiral who planned Pearl Harbor, was a student of the War College. And they also had, at that time, Chinese naval officers attending courses at the War College. So, it's a fascinating place, isn't it?
So, when you write these books, when you've written this series, did you have a subtext in mind? Were you trying to focus on certain ideas that you wanted to get across?
Well, I think that the first Rake Ozenna, One Man on Ice, came from my visit to Little Diomede Island. Firstly, I was completely shocked that this is on the border. There was no military, no police, nothing of any sort of, presence there, U.S. government presence, apart from the 80 villagers. And amongst them, 3 or 4 were Iraq veterans that had come back from the war. And I was meant to be there for an overnight stay. But as Michael would know, the weather just closed in like this, and I was there for about 10 days. So after we'd done our filming and our business, there wasn't much to do except look at Big Diomede Island, which belongs to Russia, and I sketched out this scenario: what would happen if a fleet of Russian helicopters came across and took the island, which they could do like that. It would all be over within half an hour. And then when I went back to Washington to talk to some people there, and I asked them the same question, half said, well, we'd have to go in and kick them out and get it back, and you might get a third world war out of it. And the other half said, we'll just let it go.
And how did you create your main character through this? Where did that character come from?
Well, that was a sort of process of my own stupidity in a way, because I had the scenario of the Russians coming across, and they come across on the pretext of a medical emergency, which they hear over the radio traffic. The Americans can't get in from the bases there, so they use that as a pretext to come in and take the island. And then when I was actually writing, I thought, who should my main character be? And I went through all these. The typical military thriller type is you have your Jack Ryan type of SAS intelligence officer that's been to West Point or the Naval College or something, comes in and saves the day. And I'd got to write and I said, you're absolutely being really stupid here. I said, the people of Little Diomede themselves are the toughest, most resilient. They know the environment, they know the weather, they know how to survive in the most extreme hostilities. And I'd met 3 of them that had been serving out in Iraq in the most horrendous conditions. So I created a character that actually came from that island, and that's Rake Ozenna.
Well, when you're doing this series, how much does what's going on in this world affect it? Like, does it influence what you do, or do you stay away from current topics like that?
It definitely influences, and I think that's the newsman in me, because everything sort of is sort of news or current affairs driven. So the ones I've done, I did that one, that was just after Russia took Crimea, and then it all quietened down. So Rake Ozenna. Then I did one on the Norway-Russian border, and I did another one on the Japan-Russian border, because that war hasn't technically ended. The Japan-Russian war. They've got a ceasefire like in North Korea, but they don't have a peace treaty, so they're technically still at war. And that was to do with the deal I just mentioned between the Putin-Trump Elmendorf Richardson thing that didn't go through. But the one that I've got another one called Operation Icebreaker that's coming out on October the 6th, and I just handed it in. I signed the contract for that in June or July, and I thought, well, where should I put him next? I said, well, why don't I have one where America tries to take Greenland and NATO's falling apart and Rake Ozenna comes in and saves the day? So I did a 1-sheet on that and sent it to the publisher, and they liked it. And then when I delivered it, of course, in the past month, we've actually had the whole thing becoming very real. And I could never have imagined that it would become so much clear and present as it did with that thing. It's died down a little bit now, but at one stage, NATO is still wondering what to do. The American government's policy is still to take Greenland, and it could flare up at any moment.
It just depends on his mood.
But interestingly, I've talked to a lot of, military people about this and about other things, and I get the impression, and I won't quote anybody, that if Trump gave that order, it wouldn't happen.
That's interesting. Does that unpredictability of Trump That seems to be the biggest difference. Like when you talk about history, things of the 30s and before the World War II, and the way Nazism and the whole thing went, and then the way things are now. But isn't Trump kind of like the wild card in the fact that we've never really had a person in leadership with that kind of, I don't know, I have to choose my word correctly, but unpredictability. How's that?
Unpredictability is a good word, because if you're neutral on it, and as a journalist I like a good story, so if I'm morally neutral on it, I think there's two impacts it's had, and even the first Trump administration began this, is that the outside world, particularly in Asia, where I talk about, but the big countries, Brazil, China, South Africa, those ones, they know now that the American electoral system can and will throw up presidents that they cannot plan around. So if you can't plan, and these are the countries that are looking 20, 30, 40 years forward, not like us to the next, the midterms, or we've got local elections coming up here. And they know in order to build the bridges and the airports and the type of development they need, they cannot rely on the current unpredictability of the American democratic system. And I think that is something that got embedded with the first Trump administration, and then he was re-elected, so it sort of solidified it. The second element is the one where, after the perestroika that Mike was talking about, and that second element is that America was the beacon of democracy, the systems of government that would deliver the best, the fairest, the most equal, and all the rest of it. And that's what people looked up to. But that doesn't exist anymore.
Yes.
So when you're putting America, say, against China, you're putting two equal systems that deliver whatever it is for their people, but that's not a moral benchmark with either of them now.
Yeah, and that's kind of the bizarre thing now. I would wonder how you go about writing the Greenland story when you've got it's not as cut and dry, right? You could always it was always America's the savior. They're the right ones. Everything they do is, and you have all that sort of, you can go on that mighty sort of feeling. How do you attack that story now?
I found it very difficult, actually, because you're used to having a bad guy in a global thriller, or even if you're doing a crime mystery or something, you have an identifiable bad guy. And that is usually Russia, China, Iran, something like that. In this case, it was quite difficult, because what you have and had in a way is America, or the West, for want of a better word, pitted against itself. And therefore, rather than make the institutions the sort of good and the bad, you had to have the sort of bad guys within the institutions, is what I took out of it. Because you didn't want, America is still, the leading economy, military power and everything in the world. So making out so that the Rake Ozenna is up against individuals who say they represent something but actually don't. And he has to tackle that. And of course, Britain's involved, Denmark's involved in there. And then they have schisms within themselves, because here in Britain, we have a large political faction that backs everything that Trump's doing. And in Denmark, they have similar schisms within those own governments. So it's a tricky one. I kept the politics as light as possible and concentrated on the sled dogs and the action and the and the jumping out of airplanes and the cold and all that sort of thing. Because if you start putting, and you guys know this more than anybody, if you start putting that sort of stuff too much into any story, it just drowns the story. Yeah,
it becomes the focus then, right? And that's what I mean. It would be a tough one. And how long are you going to keep doing the series, this series on thriller action?
I don't know. I think I'll do it. Well, it depends on the numbers, but I'd like to do 2 or 3 more. I think, as far as I'm aware, there is no character like this around. And at some stage, that laser of the sort of, that sort of catapults something up will hopefully land on him. And I think that the Arctic itself has got a lot of traction in it. And there's a lot of stuff that can be done there. I was offered, or I still got the contract signed, I think, to do a non-fiction book called Arctic Waters that was a follow-up from the Asian Waters book I did a few years ago that I went up to Rhode Island to research. And I've never got around to it because the fiction's got in the way. And the publishers said, I said to the publisher, I'm sorry, I haven't done this. It doesn't matter, Humphrey, just wait for the time to come. And he said, you've got to remember that X billion number of people live in Asia, but hardly anyone lives in the Arctic, so you're not going to get many local readers.
Yeah, that ain't going to happen, I guess. Well, you can send one to Sarah Palin. Maybe she'll get it out there for you, right?
Yeah,
I mean, she's got a lot of time now, I guess. Right? I don't know what she's doing now.
Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting. But with the way the world is and the events, I mean, you could probably keep the series going for a long time. There's no real.
Yeah, I would like to actually. These eventually it'll run out of steam, or I'll get fed up. But I keep thinking, well, let's put him here. Let's put him in this situation here. Let's go deeper into his family. Has he got Russian blood? Because that border, as I said, that was closed, that used to be families going backwards and forwards between those two islands. There were cousins and nephews and mistresses or whatever, were going back. And then one day it closed overnight, and they found that the people that were left on the Russian island were moved about to places way up the coastline there of the same family. And then when Perestroika came and it opened up for a bit, they went to try to look for their cousins and their uncles and that sort of thing. I mean, it was a sort of North-South Korea situation.
Wow. Now, when you go back to your first book in the series, The Man on Ice, could you see where he was going to end up in now what you're writing your fifth book, I believe? So did you kind of know this was where it's going to go location-wise?
I didn't know. I did it. I was on a BBC assignment, and I sketched it out during that 10 days, and then I wrote it, and I expected it to be a one-off or anything. But, I liked it. The publishers liked it. We did another one. I went up to the Norway-Russian border for that one, which was then pretty open, and now it's closed, and that was far up in the Arctic, and then another one, and then another one. So I didn't have any particular plan as to where it was going, but as you know with these things, in the first book you do, you really don't have time to get into the characters a lot, so you sort of have what they do, but you don't go deep into the background of why they're doing it or how they think and all the rest of it. In Rake's case, he's an Iraq veteran, and he met and fell in love with a trauma surgeon who's half Russian and half Estonian, who he met in Kabul during this. And they go back and they want to get married, but then they both realize that with his native Alaskan heritage and his home and soil on that island, and Carrie Walker, so she ends up living in Brooklyn and then living in Washington, that it's not going to work. And you've also got that situation of cultural differences preventing the white picket fence and the beautiful family and everything, but he can't get her out of his mind. So I had a sort of reader thing. I gave a talk about, I think it was the third book that came out. I said, I'm getting too many characters into this book. I'm going to have to get rid of some of them. And the one person I couldn't get rid of was Carrie Walker. And you can't even call her Rake's girlfriend, the woman that Rake is always thinking about.
It seems like to me every time you go to an open border, they close it afterwards. Like Norway and all. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's they stop sending you places. I don't know. You're closing the border on us everywhere.
I think in the past 10 years, I think more borders have been closed. than particularly here in Britain, because we left the European Union. And so now we have to go through all sorts of a thing just to go to Paris, and there's new stuff coming in too. But I remember, I mean, when I was young and I was on that trail across Asia, I went from land. I went from Australia up and then all the way across through Iran, through Afghanistan, through Turkey, Bulgaria, all of that sort of thing. And it was relatively safe. Now you can't go to, if you think about it, you can't go to Iran, you can't go to Afghanistan. It's quite tricky going Pakistan and all of that sort of stuff. So these borders are closing, aren't they?
Even Canada to the U.S.
Yeah.
Yes. And what is that border like now? I mean, it was never smooth, but at least you got through.
Interesting. I live 10 minutes from it. I live next to Niagara Falls in Buffalo. And so one of the things, though, is definitely after 9/11, everything got really strict. So now it's passport time. Yeah. So, but other than that, I have more difficult time getting back into the U.S. than going to Toronto.
Yeah, you have more problems going in. And it's strange because it's different state to state too, right? And certain states they set up and there's an extra borderline, let's say, so you can go into the U.S. and go past customs, but before you leave, you got to go through customs and then into Canadian customs, where before they never had that exit customs, and they're doing that.
Yeah, I did a film some time ago. We went out with the Mounted Border Patrol out of Spokane, Washington, looking for, it was the war on terror, so we were looking for terrorists, but the drug smugglers that were smuggling, I think it was called BC Bud, it was the marijuana from there, were the real people they were looking for. And two things. One is we went to a house, I think it was on the Canadian side, went down there, and they had dug a tunnel that came up in somebody else's house around Bellingham, I think it was, on the other side. And it went, you went down somebody's kitchen, then you were in a tunnel with a rail track on it, and that came up in somebody's kitchen on the other side. And it was a very sophisticated operation. And then I didn't realize then that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and I grew up with the Mounties, don't have horses anymore.
No, only for show.
Yeah. So we were on the border.
Yeah.
We were on the border with the Border Patrol, and the Mounties were on foot meeting us across a fence.
Yes. Well, it's been so laid back for so many years, so I don't know. It's changing some. They've tightened it up in a different way, but hopefully things get better, but who knows, at this point. Well, listen, it's been a pleasure. So let's talk about, people, the next book comes out, you said, in October, so we'll have you back then to launch it. But where do people find you or find the books? Are you, have you got a website set up or social media?
Yes, if they just Google Humphrey Hawksley, it's up there. Then my website will come up. It's humphreyhawksley.com is the website. And then in the website, there's a whole page on the Rake Ozenna series, and that has got the pictures, stunning pictures that they have going across the border there to show how close it is, and how in the winter, how the ice is just frozen over and you can technically walk from one to the other, and that sort of thing. And all the books are there, and the link is to Amazon. And of course, it's an ebook trade now, so it's to the Amazon Kindle site or Kindle Unlimited.
Well, we'll put everything up on our site too, so people can find it easy if they can't, make it easier. And that. Do you? One thing I need to ask: the way people are today, like, I don't know if you find this, but when you've been a journalist and doing this for years, the old idea of doing correct research, like talking to people, witnesses, getting at least two sources, like all of the things that you would do in order to write a story and a report. With the way it's gone on the internet, and there's so many stories out there that are totally bizarre, made up, or whatever it is, do you find it difficult to work in this profession as compared to what it was 20 years ago even?
Well, I'm finding that when you're dealing with the younger generation, they are not used to having conversations, even like we're having now. And there was one, I was a founding columnist for a Asian magazine called Nikkei Asia. And at one stage I sent in a story where I had talked to somebody about something and quoted that person. And the editor of the editorial page got back to me and said, "This is a very interesting quote. We'd love to use it, but we can't find it anywhere." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, it's not on the internet. This whole thing isn't on the internet." I sort of, it's sort of, so, it is changing. But then when, and you guys, when your writers thing, you get half of them are complaining about the publishers, the agents, the technology and whatever. I mean, I just wonder what the world thought when Caxton invented the printing press.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think it was 50 years later, Martin Luther went and nailed his theses to the door of Wittenberg Church, which started the Reformation, complaining about corruption in the Roman Catholic Church. And then half of Britain, half of Europe became Protestant or whatever. So you've always got technology, haven't you? And you've always got a new generation that thinks differently to the older generation. But I just love going out and talking to people. I mean, when I was in Alaska, a few things. One of the things I heard in Alaska was that thing about saying, if it comes to invading Greenland, that's where the line will be drawn. I don't quite know how that happens, but I was talking to one. They have the University of Fairbanks there, and it's sort of in the middle of nowhere, but it is the center of research and study for Arctic defense and the environment. And the professors there are all sort of ex-special forces, this, that, and the other. And I was talking to one of them who had read some of the Rake Ozenna series, and he says, you need to meet Sam. And I said, "Sure, I'd love to meet Sam." "Who's Sam?" He said, "Sam is your protagonist." Picks up the phone. Sam comes along. Sam is also a professor at the university. And Sam was raised in a very small native Alaskan village. He joined the military. He was special forces in Iraq, and all the rest of it, and then came back to he just 2 hours with Sam, and I was sort of corroborating and learning new things about Rake Ozenna. I said, "I have to bring you on as a consultant," I thought. And one thing fascinating me about what he said was, I said, when you were in Iraq, what was the difference between how you were seeing everything out there? Because how birds fly and the environment and the weather and the storm. There's a difference between that and your colleagues around you that might have come from Manhattan or Kansas or something like that. He said, "I could read the people's faces." I said, "Why? How come you could read and they couldn't?" He said, "Because I know what it's like to be occupied." And that stopped me dead. And I thought, okay, so every time, a federal marshal or something steps into your village, to him was like, and that's the whole sort of Inuit element, that life isn't a good or bad. You've got the weather, you've got the environment, which has to be managed, and then you have your government. And all of them are powers and forces that have to be managed. And it's not a good or a bad thing. And one of them, when I was out in Little Diomede, we were out on a boat. It was in the summer between the two islands. And I said to one of the guys there, I said, "How come you don't have the American flag flying on Little Diomede Island?" And he said, "Oh, we don't need to do that. We know who we are." And I said, "Oh, so you are a patriotic American?" And he said, "No." He said, "Why should I be a patriotic American? Because tomorrow Japan might come along and buy Alaska, and then I'd have to be Japanese." He said, "No, I'm an Eskimo from Little Diomede. That's who I am." And it was a very, these are sort of interesting little nuances. Getting back, Alan, to your question, do I like going out talking to people? Hell, I do. Yes.
Oh, it's just,
because you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's just hard because I think, that's something that a lot of the younger generation isn't doing. They're talking online. They're in groups. They're not out and talking to people like like it seemed to be years ago, where you had to, before the internet, right? And that's all. I just come across really weird conversations with people, with young people, and it surprises me that there's so much missing from what they say, and it's from that lack of interaction.
I think you're probably, because of now that you don't call anybody up, do you? You sort of text, and then you have your various platforms, or you comment on somebody's Facebook or Instagram or TikTok post. So the actual idea of having a conversation, testing the inflection of the words, the body language when they're talking to you, and all of that sort of thing, that doesn't really happen, does it? So where are we going with it? What's happening to our society?
We're all going to be in our room one day.
And there's also reading. I mean, I don't think there was a colleague of mine, Rod Little, who's a columnist for Sunday Times. I think he's starting a sort of reading campaign, because young people weren't reading books. I mean, they were barely reading newspaper articles, and they didn't have the attention span that could take in more than a couple of paragraphs without being flipped to do something else.
Yeah, that's sort of what I mean. It's a kind of, it's all caught up with us now. It's all your fault.
It's all those big five, Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and all those characters. But then they give us this technology that we can talk to each other.
Good and bad with everything. So, on that note, here we go. We're off to the races. We appreciate you being here, and everyone pick up the Rake Ozenna series, thriller series. There's 4 books now, and there will be a 5th one coming in October. Don't miss it. And Humphrey, Hawksley. So thank you very much.
Alan, Michael, thank you very much. Let's all go and have a cocktail on Little Diomede Island one day.
Absolutely.
Okay. Michael, you can fly us out there.
That's right.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.